Alright, so in this video, you and I are going to be grading raw footage, and we're going to do it in 3 different ways. We're going to grade from scratch, we're also going to grade using a LUT, which will give us a bit of a head start, and then we're going to go full on cheat and use Cinematch to grade the footage. Hey, welcome back to the channel. It is really good to see you here, and we're in different surroundings today, and this video is going to be a little bit different. This one's going to be mostly a screen recording with a voiceover, so you'll notice a change in the audio quality in just a bit. Do bear in mind that I am not a colorist. This is mostly going to be what I've learned from watching other people grading and my own experience grading raw footage, but hopefully there'll be some useful tips and insight in there for you as well.
Alright, let's go and edit some raw footage. Oh, that's just familiar. Whoops. Okay, here we go. This is a raw file, and we're in Final Cut Pro. This is what I use to edit. As you can see, we have black bars on top and bottom because the file that the Canon R5C records is a different resolution to regular 4K, so we're actually just going to quickly fix that by scaling in a bit. That was fine. So there we go. Okay, this is our raw file from which we are going to be working. First step we're going to go on to look at is make sure that Final Cut has not applied a LUT to it already. When you first load a raw file into Final Cut Pro, it is going to apply Canon Log 2 Cinema Gamma LUT to it. It also does this with XFAVC footage, so bear that in mind. If you're looking at the image and going, that looks like it's graded already, Final Cut has probably done that automatically. I've tried to find where to turn this off, haven't managed to find that. If I do, I will put that in a comment or in the description below. But just bear that in mind, if you want to grade from scratch, you're going to need to turn that off. And that's what we're doing with this first clip, is we are grading from scratch. And as you can see, it is a very flat image. There's no contrast in it, no saturation, or very little at least. And as you can see, here we go. This is a flat image, very little contrast from the RGB parades. And this kind of shows us where our black is and where our highlights or absolute white is and where clipping information is. Now, to bring that up, you need to press Command 7 and you do the same thing to get rid of it. Over here in the effects panel, we can bring up different options. So you can have a color board, color wheels, color curves, hue and saturation. Color board is a lot more basic. This is the one that comes up automatically. You have your exposure, saturation, and color. I don't like to use color boards. I prefer to use color wheels. And if you're somebody who uses, I think, Lumetri and DaVinci, if you use DaVinci, you're probably more used to having this setup. There's also color curves, and DaVinci has color curves as well, but I don't like using them. I find them intimidating. I'm not a big fan of it. A lot of photographers prefer curves. I like wheels. It is something more comfortable for me as a videographer. As we know, with shooting in RAW, you can change the color temperature nice and easily. This was shot in the correct color temperature. I will do a video on fixing bad RAW video later, when you have bad lighting and incorrect color temperature. This one, we're just going to be focusing on grading it from scratch. If you have a calibrated screen, you can eyeball it, but we're going to use our RGB parade to get a better idea about where our crunching blacks and blown out highlights are. So we're going to bring down, first of all, our blacks to 0. So you see how blacks represent, or the darkest part of the image, usually the black part of the image is the darkest, so that's the lowest. And we've brought it down to the line. I've gone a little bit beyond because I know that it is the deep shadows over here that are represented by these spikes. There and there are those 2 spikes over there. And the same on the other side, there and there. That's where we're getting those spikes. So, if we lose a bit of detail there, that's absolutely fine because that is a shadow. But we don't want to go crazy and get everything crushed below that. So we want to have it just to about that. Some people will go just to 0 and no further beyond for the first grade. It's entirely up to you. If you want to have several layers of color wheels, one that has the initial grade and then one that has further grading to it that you can turn on and off, I'm just going to take it to roughly about the right level. For a lot of our work, we'd like to have a very simple grade. The main thing for me is color accuracy. It needs to have pop, and it needs to have natural colors, so the saturation mustn't be over the top. We'll get to saturation in just a second. Next up, we're going to take our highlights up, and so that the white part of our image is at 100. And I know that the white part of the image is actually the door behind me. But as you can see, if I reach 100 with the section that's the door, it's here, we're going to have blown out highlights in the background. And that's why I wanted to shoot this with the outdoors as my background, so that we can protect those highlights. So I'm going to bring that down. And you're also going to notice the problem with Final Cut Pro's color wheels is that if you take it up all the way to the top of that semicircle, you can still keep on pushing beyond that, but the arrowhead doesn't move. So you do lose some accuracy once you get past that point, and it's much harder to do those tweaks. So keep that in mind. And this is something that you will encounter with raw footage because there's so much contrast that you can add to that shot. Okay, so taking it to about there, we're still protecting our highlights, or there's some bits that are blown out that are not really going to affect the image too much or make it look nasty and washed out. So I think that's alright as a starting point. So let's shut down the RGB parade and let's turn our attention now to saturation. You could add global saturation, and I don't really like the way that that looks. It seems to add too much to greens, and once you get to a decent point with your skin tones, some of the colors become way too saturated. What I prefer to do is instead bring up the mid-tones, and of course you can have the highlights or the shadows and change your colors in those particular channels, but I like to bring up the mid-tones until it's at the point where I am happy with, there you go, that is about a level. That is about a level where my mid-tones, I'm happy with the saturation there. As you can see, it hasn't quite brought up the saturation in the plants behind me, so I could increase the highlight saturation a little bit, and again, still not as bad as when I increased the global saturation. Alright, so there you go. That is a very basic grade to some raw footage. It still doesn't look quite right. That might be to do with the fact that there's still contrast that we can add. You can see with my beard, my face, it looks a bit plasticky. This might be because I haven't put enough contrast into the image, and also because it lacks sharpness. So when you shoot in RAW, there is no sharpening added by the camera, and yeah, the R5C is a very sharp camera, and this is shot on a sharp lens, the Sigma 18-35. But it was at f1.8, which isn't the sharpest point on that lens, so we might need to add some sharpening in post. First of all, I'm going to try and give a bit more pop and a bit more contrast to the image. So I'm actually going to take down the midtones a little bit. If I were to take that down, we're now getting a much more digitally looking image with the fall off, the gradient into the shadows being a bit too extreme. So I'm just going to do that. And this is actually a very accurate color. This is what that jacket looks like in real life. Skin tone's not quite there yet. I'm going to take that highlight up a little bit. The advantage of shooting in RAW is that you get a lot more play in the shadows, highlights, and midtones, and in the tweaks and the saturation before you get artifacting, as opposed to using an XFAVC or AVC or MP4 file or HEVC. You don't get as much flexibility with those files. That is the advantage of shooting in RAW. And you'll find the fall off to the highlights being a lot more pleasant and a lot more natural when shooting in RAW. So I think we need a bit more pop here. And we're going to get that through adding a touch of sharpening. So in Final Cut Pro, you can type in sharpen, and you get the automatic sharpening in there. Now, you don't get much control and being able to fine tune. What I like to use is an Unsharp mask instead. And the one that I use is the one by A4D. So that obviously is a bit extreme. I'm going to add it twice so you can see how it looks with the default settings and after we've tweaked it. So you can compare between the two. So we're going to leave this one as it is, and that's going to be the one that we compare to with this. The way to set the Unsharp mask, it's a bit like if you're somebody that drives a manual gearbox. When you are releasing the clutch in order to engage the gears, you find the biting point. So that's what we need to try and do with our sharpening. And so I'm going to crank up the amount of sharpening, and I'm going to decrease the radius. And these are really the two that we need to be focusing on the most. After cranking up the amount, we can now see it's way over the top. So this is where we need to find the biting point where our sharpening kicks in. And I would say it is just about there. Let's crop in so we can have a closer look. So it's still a little bit too much. We're probably a little bit beyond the bite point there. As you can see, yeah, it's adding a nice sharpening, but we'll take down the amount, and this you're going to need to eyeball it. It's going to be up to you with your nice sharp screen, being able to tell what is too much sharpening and what is nice and natural. So there's before, and there's after. You can see there is a good level of sharpening there, and it's not overly sharpened. That looks quite natural. Nice sharp image. Cool. And that has also added a little bit more contrast to the scene. And let's compare to, so there's without, with, without, and that is with the default setting. You did not want to be using that. It looks like it's been shot on a DJI camera. Now we have our sharpening, some good contrast. I'm going to add a bit more contrast. That's where I got my coat caught on some thorn bushes when on a shoot. And I love that jacket. It was devastating. All right, take down the shadows a little bit more. Okay, there we go. A nice punchy image. There you go. Before, after, before, flat, no saturation, after, saturation, and we have some pop and contrast in the image. Looks quite nice, and it's much sharper because we've added an Unsharp mask. There we go. Nice, sharp, contrasty, saturated image from RAW. Now that you've got your initial grade, you can go and do more extreme color grades to it. So you can make the shadows teal and the midtones orange, and you can decrease. What else can you decrease? You can take down the where's my curves? Take down the greens. Good lord, you can go crazy. That's a good LUT right there. I'll make this one available for sale in the description. Let's compare these two side by side. Looking much nicer on the right, we have a fully graded image. Okay, so in the second one, we are going to use a LUT. Now, as I mentioned at the start of the video, you can have the LUT set here in Final Cut Pro. So over here, you can select Canon Log 2, or you can select Canon Log 3 for a less harsh LUT. But I don't like to use this built-in setting, and I'll show you why. When we add our color corrections, I don't know if this is going before or after the LUT that is built into Final Cut Pro, and we really want it to be happening before the LUT is applied, and I haven't been able to find documentation on this. Let me know in the comments if you know if this is being applied after or before the LUT. I found it varies, so sometimes I'm getting some good flexibility when I'm using the built-in LUT, sometimes I'm not. So what I want to always make sure is that my LUT, we're going to use custom LUT, I always want my LUT to be after my color wheels. This is because, and we're going to apply Canon Log 2 LUT because it's got more pop and more contrast than the Canon Log 3 LUT, as you'll see. I'll show you with the RGB parades actually. So this is Canon Log 2 LUT. Canon Log 3, you can see it's a bit less contrasty. So Canon Log 2 LUT. See, instantly you've got all the contrast added, you've got your black points, you've got your white points added. But if we have the color wheels after the LUT, we lose information much quicker. You have a lot, it just looks, you have less flexibility with the highlights than if you have it before the LUT. So you see you get much more play with that. So if you're using Final Cut Pro or using any LUT, make sure your corrections and grades are done before the LUT is applied. Obviously you can add another set of color wheels after the LUT if you want to add some further fine tuning with your colors and to give your kind of artistic approach with your colors. But we're just doing a basic color correction, so make sure your corrections are above the LUT. We instantly have some nice pop, and that took just seconds. But we're still going to add a little bit more with our color wheels. So bring up the RGB parade again. You can see it is just reaching 0, just about. So I'm going to take it on a little bit more. So there it is, it's on 0. And also take up the highlights a little bit more. We have a lot of pop in this image and some level of sharpness through the increased contrast, but we still don't have enough saturation. So we're going to bring up the mid-tone saturation. That looks good. And that was very quick, wasn't it? As you can see, less yellow, which is much better. So obviously I needed to change the yellowness of my skin tone from that raw grade. You can see in the background there is more color information because it is not as contrasty as the image with the LUT, but I like the way that looks with the LUT. In fact, you probably add a bit more saturation and it just looks much nicer, much quicker. So you can see there's a lot more going on below the hood with a LUT that I would need to grade in there. So adding a LUT saves a lot of time and just gives you a much more finished look with your image. If you're really into your color correction, your color grading, then yeah, grade from scratch gives you a lot more flexibility. But if efficiency is more important to you, then just load in a LUT and you instantly have that nice look to it. I would say it still needs a touch of sharpness added to it. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy and paste in that sharpness. And we have a nice sharp image. Nice and punchy, contrasty. There you go. That is a raw footage graded very quickly with a LUT. You still do have the flexibility of a raw file. It's just much faster. So that is the official Canon LUT, Canon Log 2 to BT709 wide DR. That is available from the Canon website. I'll put a link to that in the description. And the process is simple. You go custom LUT, do your grade, color wheels for a little bit of fine tuning, and then add a touch of sharpening. Looking at these two side by side, I like the LUT version better because look at the skin tones, it is way better. Fixing this would take a lot of fine tuning within the color wheels and it takes a lot of time. You could always add a mask in to select just the skin tone, so I can show you that now. So let's add in a new color wheels. You can always add in a mask by selecting that. So that is just selecting my skin tones, and then I can add a bit of blue / teal to reduce the amount of orange. And yeah, there you go. Simple, but it's an extra step that you need to take in order, and now I actually prefer this, that image. So yeah, a little bit of extra work to make the raw from scratch file look a bit better, look as good as the LUT file, but now it actually looks better. So that is something to bear in mind. Just takes a little bit extra work, but you can actually make it look much nicer if you go from scratch. And if you actually look at the jacket, that's really accurate color right there. That not so much. So the LUT is introducing some inaccuracy with the colors. That looks fabulous. That looks dull and yellow now. So yeah, keep that in mind. with that little change, the graded from scratch file looks better than the LUT file. And yeah, so I should shut up. All right. Okay, so we're going to use this file for our final grade. Some awesome karate moves. Yes. Very cool. And we're actually going to use Cinematch for this one. And Cinematch is some software that's a plugin that you can get made by a company in New Zealand. And the main reason why you'd want to use Cinematch generally is to match different cameras. If you use different cameras to shoot your stuff, or you're getting footage from somebody else that is using a certain camera that you need to match to yours, Cinematch is very useful, but it does have very handy grading tools as well. So what we're going to do, in fact, first of all, we're going to make sure that the automatic LUT isn't applied. It's not there, so that's good. Open controls. Cinematch. Why does it always open on the left-hand side? It's really freaking annoying. Okay, we're going to choose the camera that we shot this in. So we need the Canon R5C. Now, there's no RAW setting, but just like with the other LUTs, we're going to use C-Log2 Cinema Gamut because we need more contrast added, and we wouldn't get enough contrast if we used the C-Log3 LUT that Cinematch is incorporating. So you load that in, and then you just press apply 709 transformation, and you have some very nice colors already. And then we just go in and do our tweaks again with our color wheels, but we make sure that it is done before Cinematch. And I think it needs a bit more pop. So let's get our RGB parade back. Go. So even when you're applying the LUTs, you still need to do these color wheel changes. So they're not a complete shortcut. A bit more saturation there. Saturation is something you don't really need to add after using Cinematch. Maybe a touch. Okay, so there we go, pretty quick. It's looking good. And if we compare it to the other two, here, it's got more natural colors, much quicker. Although, this is the thing with Cinematch. So, the skin tones look natural very quickly, but as you can see, the orange in my jacket zip is completely different. It's way less saturated, and it's got a much more reddy color to it. So on the left, you can see that is what the jacket looks like. That's a bit inaccurate, but the skin tones, instantly, very nice. So that'll obviously need more tweaking in post if you want to get more accurate colors. Next up, we're going to have all three next to each other, and you can let me know in the comments which one you think is the best image. You can see that using the LUT and using Cinematch, the process was much quicker, but you don't have the same control over the image that you do when you're grading from scratch, which I actually quite like. I like having that flexibility that grading from scratch gives you, and it just gives you a much nicer image depending on what you prefer. You know, using a LUT or using Cinematch will be a much faster way to do it. I really like shooting in RAW now. I never used to, but shooting in RAW actually gives you a lot of flexibility and a really nice image when you treat it properly. So it's definitely something that I like to shoot more of, and I'm going to explore what are the best settings to shoot RAW in when using the Canon R5C. That's the camera that I use, and there are certain things that you can do to increase your battery life while shooting in RAW, and also make sure that you're not having ridiculously large file sizes. So I'm going to explore those in another video, so if you want to check that out, do stay in touch.
There you go. There's the three ways that I grade RAW footage, and it will often depend on the scenario that the footage was shot, the lighting, how much time I have, and also what mood I'm in. Find out which one works best for you and your shooting style and your editing style. Cinematch isn't cheap, it's very useful, but it's not entirely necessary, so you can grade very well without it. If there's some insight that you might have that you would like to share with other viewers of the video, please do put it in the comments. Let's all share useful insights and useful tips that we've picked up along the way and help each other improve our video production. Also, let me know what other kind of videos you would like to see in the future, and I shall see you in the next one. Take it easy.